Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our March Women's History Month special about local women who made history. It's a great honor to have three local historians actually join us tonight to give us their stories about some local women who made history. Corey Krupizanna, I've known her for a long time. She's been involved in the community, in the pagoda skyline, and meant the tower preservation and all that stuff, and BCTV for a long time. So it's great to have you with us, Corey.
Thank you.
Michelle Lynch, I've known also for a long time. She's a reporter for the Reading Eagle. She's also a local historian. And what else can I say about you, Michelle?
Oh, that's good.
She used to work for the city of Reading. That's when I first met her. And Rick Politica, who I think I've just met.
Politica is the last name.
Politica, I'm sorry. See,
It
I was
did it.
practicing it in my head.
You did it right up
Rick
front.
Politica, who is on the board of directors of the Berks History Center, as is Corey, and I think Michelle too. So
I'm not.
you're not, okay.
You should be.
She was.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Corey, who's going to start tonight's program. And we'll take questions at the end. They're going to do their they're each going to do their presentation. And then when they're done, we'll take questions. So if you want to put them in the chat, or if you want to just raise your hand when you have a question, when they're done with their presentations, that's fine. Okay.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. And oh, here's our first picture already. I am going to tell you about a person, a woman. You might not know her by name, but you will know her as I start telling you her story. Her name is Catherine Irene Cuck Whitman. They call her Kate. Kate was born and raised in Reading. She was the daughter of Henry Cuck, who owned a shoe business on Penn Street. Kate loved to work at her father's shoe store, and her friends say she was known for her collection of high-top shoes. This is where I've spoken to the family a lot, because Kate is kind of an unknown person in herself. So the family feels that the shoe store on Penn Street is where she might have met her husband, William Abbott Whitman. Does anybody know that name? William Whitman, I'll tell you a little about him. He was a feisty, redheaded politician. He loved his politicking. He loved his gambling. He loved his women. He was a character. He was out there. He was a businessman. He was a promoter. He actually is very charming and inspiring. Always wore a little flower on his lapel. So he was a showman, put it that way. He owned a rock quarry business on the top of Mount Penn, which he ran with his brother. And he is the one that I want to say brought baseball to Reading. He built Circus Maximus, which is actually the Albright College Stadium. And you can still see his two pillars that remain at the front entrance. And they did have lions on top. I don't know if they still do, but take a look at that next time you go out there and think of William Whitman. He was also president of the Outlaw Baseball Executives. He was city selectman. He worked for the city. He was on council, and he was in charge of the water and sewer department. He earned his title father of the Spring Street subway by creating and designing the plan for the subway, which was a really big improvement for the time. He ran, thank you, Rick. He ran for mayor 3 times, but he was not successful any of the times. But he then went on to build the world famous pagoda in 1908, hoping that he would win favorship with everyone in the city and they would vote for him. It didn't work, but we're lucky enough that we have the pagoda. So Kate and Mr. Abbott, William, they lived Oh, that's one for later.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's a good picture. We're going to talk about that one later. So right now I want to show you the rock quarry business that they ran. And you'll see where that was located on the edge of the mountain. If we have a picture of the rock quarry.
You want me to show it now?
Yes, please. That was their rock quarry business. Okay, so they lived and resided in a beautiful gray stone house that was on Marion Street in the city of Reading. It was also the area that William Whitman was the selectman for in that district. But he built two, he was a contractor. He built two homes. One was at the corner of 12th and Marion, and their home where they resided was one door down. But they were huge, beautiful gray stone mansions. The Whitmans had a big W on their stained glass window. So it was really a beautiful door that they had. But Kate loved living there. And she also loved the fact that her husband built the subway, which connected the west side of Reading to the northeast side of Reading. And her friends could come by for the afternoon and they could walk down to the silk mill, which was located at 11th and Marion. And there they could find the latest styles of hosiery. So a lot of the women loved coming up to Kate's house. Unfortunately, both mansions are gone. They were torn down to make way for the 12th and Marion School. So Kate and William had one son. His name was William Abbott Whitman. He became a local attorney. It's a shame, but Mrs. Whitman died in 1916 on her birthday, and she's buried next to her husband in the Charles Evans Cemetery. And when you visit their plot, and if you turn yourself around, you have a great view of the pagoda. So that's the nice story of Kate and William Abbott Whitman. But let me tell you the true story about Kate and Billy. They never lived a quiet life. Billy was always out in the public, politicking and in the newspapers, and Kate would kind of get quite embarrassed because they do some offlandish cartoons about Billy, and she didn't like it. Also, when he was building the pagoda right here on this spot that you're looking at, the rock quarry, this is his land. This is where he built the pagoda, right in the edge of the mountain. But he spent all his time and money up there. And then, Rick, if you want to put up that little, the little house at the pagoda, he spent numerous nights imbibing with friends. Up here at the little man cave, if you look way over to the left of the screen, you see a little building that was built at the pagoda. Now that building was soon torn down, and the roof of that building graced the Whitman's home at 12th and Marion for many years until those homes were torn down. But Mr. Whitman, he spent so much time and money up there at the pagoda. He never brought money home for groceries, and she just kind of really hated it. But I was lucky enough to be able to talk to the family, see a lot of original articles and items that the family still owns from the pagoda. Eventually, with Mr. Whitman and his outlandish lifestyle, they foreclosed on the pagoda. And actually, the anniversary is coming up. April 21st is 1911 is when the pagoda was given to the city for $1. And that's the story of Kate and William Whitman. But I want to show you a little artifact I have. This is, where am I at? Kate's purse. I don't know if you can see that. It has her initials on it. Is that dark?
Yes.
Yeah, it's dark. I don't know where I can put it that it would get lighter. Sorry. It has her initials on it. KIW. It also, inside of it, had her gloves, And I also have a cape that's hers. So we do have some items from Kate. And if I can quickly do this, if you want to read any more about the pagoda and Kate, and I can't get this right there, Kate and William and the pagoda and the mountain, you can pick up a copy of the Footprints on the Mountain. Get that at the Historical Society, the pagoda, or by seeing me. So that's the story of Kate and Billy. I'd like to now introduce Michelle Napolitano Lynch.
Thank you, Corey. So there are just so very many women in Berks County who made history, thousands, and we're only going to be able to talk about maybe 5 women tonight. And so that's not to neglect all the many other very accomplished women who really made a name for themselves and contributed to the history of the county. But I'm just going to tell you tonight about 2 who I have particular interest in. And Rick, if you can go to my first, there we go. So this is Dinah Clark. And Dinah Clark worked as a sawyer. She sawed for a living. And what she did was she was an itinerant sawyer. So she would go house to house through the city in the 1850s and 1860s and 1870s. And people knew she was coming and they'd leave what they wanted to be cut up out front for her. Or sometimes she would have to, knock on the doors and find out what they wanted. Sometimes they'd take her to the backyards and she'd cut down trees. One time a tree fell on her and injured her and she couldn't work for a while, and that really set her back. But she became really well known. Everybody in town knew her. What ended up happening was she didn't come to Reading initially. In the beginning, she was born in the country and she worked on farms. And she was born to slave parents who lived and worked on the Gabriel Heister farm in Bern Township because he was their owner. And Rick, can you go to my next slide? So, the Gabriel Heister house was torn down to make way for Blue Marsh, but some of the beautiful woodwork from it was saved and is set up at the History Center. It is the Heister Room. So Dinah, she was interviewed by the Reading Eagle in 1871, and she told the story of how she had to work here on the farm, and she may never have even seen the inside of the house because she worked mostly in the fields. She had to dig potatoes. She had to carry lime from the lime kiln on her back, and some of the lime would trickle down her back. It would come through the burlap bags and it would fall down the back of her neck and it would burn her skin. She had a really, really tough life. She worked very, very hard, and they didn't feed her very well either. They gave her mostly just rye bread to eat and maybe some potatoes, a little bit of cheese. They didn't have real coffee. They had coffee made out of rye, sort of like postum. If you ever had postum, that's kind of what they were drinking. And meanwhile, even though she was born after the Emancipation Act of 1780, so she was technically free, but under that act, she had to work as an indentured servant until she was 28. So she was stuck there working for Gabriel Heister and his family up until she turned 28. And Heister was a Revolutionary War militia colonel and a state legislator. He was a very prosperous farmer and a miller, so and a slave owner. But Dinah remembered him as a good-natured man when he wasn't intoxicated, so he must have been a drinker as well. And she liked his wife. She liked Mrs. Heister, and she called Mrs. Heister a splendid woman and said that Mrs. Heister was very kind to the poor people. Now, she couldn't remember very much about her parents. She remembered only that their surname was Bell and that they had been slaves at the Heister farm. She after Heaster sold her indenture to his brother-in-law, Jacob Seltzer, for $100. And then Dinah had to move to Seltzer's farm, which was near Womelsdorf, and she worked there for him. And then Seltzer opened up an inn, and she became the servant at the inn. She had to carry water, she had to cook food, she had to do cleaning, and whatever else he wanted her to do there at the inn. And then Seltzer transferred her indenture to the iron maker or ironmaster Samuel Jones, and she had to move to Heidelberg Township. And Jones was not a very good master. He was really hard on her, and he beat her with a cowhide whip. But it was while she was working for Jones that she met and married William Clark, and she reached her age of 28 and could be free. So the two of them lived for a little while on a farm in Bern Township, and then they moved to Reading. And it was William had actually worked on the iron plantation as a sawyer and a woodcutter, and he taught her how to do that job. He's the one that taught her how to do it. So once they were in Reading, they helped to found the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church at 119 North 10th Street. And several of their children were baptized there, and some of their children were buried in the graveyard in the back of the church. All the gravestones have been removed, but there are still burials there in the churchyard. Only 4 of the 11 children that they had survived to adulthood. Now, this church is known to have been involved in the Underground Railroad. And so we don't know for certain that Dinah and her husband were involved with that, but they probably were. And in fact, the her home is just a half a block away from this church. So the church was really, really important to her, important in her life. And can we show the map, Rick, where her house is? Okay, so she lived on what was called Hintershit's Alley, and yes, thanks, Rick. And now it's called Hintershit Street, and you can see that the alley leads almost directly straight up to the African Methodist Episcopal Bethel Church, which is there. Thank you, Rick. Both Dinah and William had to work really hard to support themselves and their children, and William fell pretty deeply in debt, and creditors were after him. So when they bought the house on Hintershit Street in 1847, it was actually put into their daughter Hannah's name and her husband Enoch Sanders, and held in trust for Dinah. So there was there was actually a provision in the deed that excluded its seizure by William's creditors. Now, William died about 3 years after they bought the house, and now Dinah was left to support herself, and she wandered around town, sawing wood, splitting kindling, sometimes chopping, sometimes sawing, and it was really hard labor. But when she would go from house to house, she would learn about the news in that neighborhood, and she'd carry that news around. So people really came to enjoy her visits. And she, even though she never learned to read or write, she was very intelligent, and people really liked her. And they liked how she would bring the news and the gossip around. And she became quite famous in the city. Everyone knew her. As she got older, she was more and more homebound and couldn't work anymore. And there are accounts in the old newspapers of charitable organizations visiting her and bringing her material to make clothes and all kinds of sundries and non-perishable foods and things like that. And she also, one of her daughters was abandoned by her husband and was blind. She had various illnesses and became blind. And so Dinah cared for her as well. So she had herself and her daughter to support. And as she got older, she really couldn't do the heavy, hard work anymore. And it was really hard on her. But she died in 1879 of kidney disease that could have been associated with diabetes. And she was about 84 or 85 at the time. Nobody really knows exactly when she was born or what her exact age was. When she was interviewed in 1871, the newspaper said she was over 100, but obviously she wasn't. So no one really knew exactly how old she was. But when she died, at the end of that year, the Reading Times included a list with all the names of the notable people who died that year in Reading, and her name was on the list. And she was the only woman and the only Black person listed on the list of notables who died that year. So 200 people attended her funeral, and she is buried at Charles Evans Cemetery in an unmarked grave on the Aaron and William Still lot. And that is the story of Dinah Clark. And now I'm going to introduce Rick Politica, who is a trustee and volunteer at the Berks History Center and curated the World War I exhibit and opened up the time capsule. And while he was working on that, that is when you learned about this, right, Rick?
Kind of around that time.
Around that time, he got involved in going through the archives of the Women's Club on North 5th Street, 140 North 5th. Is that the address?
I believe, yeah.
And discovered some stories of notable women, and he's going to share one of those right now.
Yes, a friend of mine, this is actually one of her relatives. So she kind of when I first met her, she was always telling me about my subject, and I wasn't interested in it. And when I started digging into it, I got a pretty good story about it. So I am next in line here. We're going to delve into the world of entertainment from Reading. And well, we're going to finish up with Dinah Clark's obituary there.
Sorry.
So, yeah, we forgot about that. You should have moved me on there, Michelle.
I forgot I had that. Sorry.
That's okay. I forgot most of my pictures too, but I do remember what my last one is, so I'm good. So we're going to talk about my subject, and my subject didn't become wealthy because of the entertainment world that she enjoyed, but she had a long time passion for entertaining people, and it started from a very early age. And this was the entertainment of dance, and we're talking about Pearl Haynes. Pearl Haynes was born in 1899, July 15th, to William and Catherine Haynes. And at the early age of, she was someone that just, some people were just born to entertain, and that's what Pearl Haynes was all about. And as much as we see her here as a dancer, and that was where predominantly a lot of her notoriety came from, as far as in the world of entertainment, a lot of it also was that how many lives that she touched. And that's kind of what we want to start with the beginning of the story. From her first time that she actually spoke in front of people was a recital at St. Mark's UCC Church at 211 Green Street when she was age 3. So she was very, very young, and she was not bashful about getting up in front of the crowd. So that was, and that was actually I believe she was reading a recited poem, is what it was, at a Sunday school rally at St. Mark's UCC. Beautiful church, without a doubt, down on Greenwich Street in Reading. And then shortly after that, dance lessons ensued. She was receiving some dance lessons from Professor Drexel, better known as Pappy Drexel, from his studio at 1144 Perkiomen Avenue. And in the beginning of her career, and her career really did truly start at that young of an age, because her formative years in the very beginning were established in the world of theater. And her first major role that she played around town was Alice in Wonderland, and she played that at the Orpheum Theater in August of 1908. And she subsequently continued to play that at the Orpheum and the Academy of Music. And when I talk about that, the thing that I found very intriguing about this story with Pearl was this was not something that was just word of mouth. this was something that actually made headlines in the papers at the time. And when you have you're before the age of 10 and you are gaining headlines on an article in the newspaper about a performance that you did, that must have said something about what she was actually doing. She was so popular with that Alice in Wonderland role that she played that as she used to ride on the open trolley cars, little kids would yell out, "Hey, Alice." So that was pretty much, she was quite popular at a very early age. So she continued on into the theater world and did various other plays. And she played at just about every large venue in the city at that time, whether it be at the Raja Temple at Pearl and Franklin Streets, whether it was at the Hippodrome on Penn Street, or it was at the Orioles home on South 9th Street or Redmond's Hall. She played at all of those. Those were like the biggest venues first, before the theaters really started to get built in the city of Reading. But the Hippodrome actually later on became the Warner Theater, and well, it was the State, and then it was the Warner. That was the what that venue was. But by 1915, Pearl already was so popular in town that she drew crowds wherever she performed. And then she began with the juvenile minstrels, where they began dance routines, and that was the second part that really took off and was really the formative part of her career. She actually, at age 16, at the Mawson Marion Fire Hall in 1915, she started her own dance studio. She was still in school. You got to remember that now. She already started at dance school because she was so, the public could not get enough of the charismatic Pearl Haynes. They really took to this young girl, and she actually used that to her benefit because she started a school and she attracted so many young people that wanted to follow in her footsteps. And that's, I think, a very important part of the lesson that we learned from Pearl Haynes. She was a very positive influence on people her age, and she was just very good for the community all in general. She was so popular with that school, she actually had to move to what became one of her longtime residence for as far as her school was concerned, and that was at 108 South 6th Street. Yes, that was correct. And she was there for many, many years. She had actually taken friendly with a young woman by the name of Irene Burkhart, who wound up being her pianist for over 35 years. So I think the story that Pearl kind of tells us is the friendships that she formed. They were lasting friendships because her and Irene worked, and I knew Irene too. I actually knew her personally, but those friendships lasted forever, for quite a long time. So with the dance school she became more polished in the dance world, and that's what she was doing, and that led to the next venue. Oh, excuse me 1 second. My nephew would always call at the right time. Sorry about that. He always does that, no matter what I'm doing. Okay, so the next venue, in 1927, she had actually hired an agent, George Hamid, and they proceeded on a 14-year tour of the country, going to county fairs. And what we're looking at is the Pollyannes, and this is basically the Pearl Haynes Review, it was better known as. What they would do is they would book their shows up and down the East Coast in all the county fairs. This went from 1927 to 1941. They would travel they had a truck where they had all their props, and the girls went. They all got paid $20 a week, and they were chaperoned. Pearl's mother, Catherine, actually came along and helped cook the meals, with one of the Pollyannes actually being an assistant to Catherine. And she actually sewed their clothes for them. So she made their outfits for them. So this was actually, what they wore was actually part of the price of admission to a county fair. And what we're looking at here is a county fair in West Virginia. Actually, it's weird because the story that Pearl told, this was actually Virginia, but the magazine told me it was West Virginia. And so I guess I would have to believe the magazine because it was more current at the time, because the Pearl interview was many, many years later. But being in West Virginia, the magazine that we're talking about, that this picture and a few others that I'm going to show came in, was this issue from 1938 of Life magazine. So Polly and the Pollyannes made that, and how that all kind of worked out. And one thing I have to make mention of is when they were actually performing at these county fairs up and down the East Coast, they went all the way down south. They went further south than the United States, actually, as I'll be telling you soon. But when they would go to these county fairs, they were actually one of the headline acts that they were saying, that they were always advertising, Polly and the Pollyannes. So that was what we're looking at here. And these were all, George Hamid actually called them the biggest little show on earth, is what they call, because it was first class entertainment, but it was being done at county fairs is what it came out to. So the advertisements were, like I said, always was Pearl Haynes Review was coming to town. They would bring scenery, everything with them in their truck. And these are some of the pictures from that 1938. This is the girls clowning around in between sets. And the other thing that happened with Pearl Haynes and the Pollyannes was they were actually the first dance review to leave the travel out of the country when they sailed to San Juan, Puerto Rico to perform at the Grand Fair Exposition in 1934, I believe it was. That was the year that they went there. During that time, they were invited to work on a radio program where they sang a duet, and then Pearl played the marimba as a solo. And then also when President Roosevelt was down in a parade, and they called out to President Roosevelt, "Hey, Frank," from the review, and Franklin Roosevelt looked up and smiled and and acknowledged them. So this is the last picture from that 1938 photograph, and this was like one of the girls ironing her outfit in the back. So when we're going on forward with this, during that point in time of life, and even when you get into the 40s, Pearl Haynes was always her opinion was always included in the entertainment section. They always had her as one of the entertaining acts that was always listed in the papers in the 1930s and the 1940s. And she also, it would not be uncommon to see her in the newspaper promoting a movie that was just coming into the embassy or the Astor. And also, she would have her name in the articles, listed with names like John Barrymore, Myrna Loy, Cary Grant. So that was actually, that's how much clout that she held. 1952, she got married to George Horton. They met at a fair, obviously, because that's what they were doing at that time. They were married in 52, and then she moved away from the city for that short amount of time because George passed away in 1958. She then came back. She started working again at Mickey Norton's School of Dance in Laureldale. Two of her students actually started their own dance studios also as well. And one of them, by the name of Robin Miller, actually was actually a understudy at West Side Story, and she also performed at the Court of Ballet and Radio City Music Hall. So once she came back to City in her older years, she was a two-time president of the Women's Club. This is actually a picture from 1976, or 75, I believe it was. There are two pictures I have of Pearl, and this is from 1975. This was the day to remember where they were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Second Continental Congress. So this just goes to show how small and petite Pearl was. And she was a two-time president, like I had said. And also one of the nice comments that she had in the president's message in the 1974 Women's Club Bulletin was, "Your life is God's gift to you. What you do with your life is your gift to God." So this other photograph I show is Pearl welcoming you to the Women's Club in 1975. Pearl died in 1996. And as much as Pearl Haynes didn't really make a lot of money at the work that she did over the years, she had everything that she had. And to close out my program or my little segment here, I will say that she, her last was a comment of hers, I should say, at the very end. And she said, you could say I'm a millionaire with friends. She didn't have money, but she had everything she wanted. So that is the story of Pearl Haynes. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Michelle Lynch.
Thank you, Rick. That was a good story about Pearl. Thanks. So the next woman I'd like to tell you about is Lilith May Wilson. And Lilith was the first woman from Berks County to be elected as a state representative, and that occurred in 1930. And she was a member of the Socialist Party, and she also was the first Socialist Party member elected to any legislative body in the US. So she really did make history. And it really wasn't the first time. It was the first successful time making history, but not the first time she made history, because in 1922, she was nominated as the Socialist Party candidate for Pennsylvania governor, and she was the first woman ever to run for that office. And she didn't win. And to this day, Pennsylvania still has not had a woman as governor. It's one of 20 states to have never had a woman as governor. And don't ask me what the other ones are, because I don't know. I would have to look that up. But Lilith is not a native of Reading, but she did make Reading her home, and she is buried here. So I include her among notable women of Berks. She really did make a name for herself here. As a young girl, she was born in Indiana, in Dublin, Indiana, and her family moved around a little bit, and eventually, I'm trying to think where they settled, and I'm not sure I can remember. Kokomo, that's a name I should have remembered. So eventually they settled in Kokomo, and she graduated from the high school there. And even when she was a teenager, she was very politically minded, and she was a suffragist. And at that time, of course, women did not have the vote, and that was something that she campaigned for. This is a younger Lilith here. And she was only 23 years old when she joined the Socialist Party. Sometimes you would see her referred to as Miss Martin in some of the older newspapers when she came to the area to speak, and before she married her husband, Birch Wilson. But that was actually, she was not a miss. Martin was a previous married name. Her maiden name was Brown. And she married George Martin in 1903, a day after she turned 17. She was very young, and the marriage did not last. She did file on the grounds of mental cruelty. So, you know, back then there were no fault divorces. You had to have a reason, and that was her reason. And she was granted a divorce. She enrolled in her newly divorced, and in her early 30s, she enrolled in the Rand School of Social Science, which was a socialist institution in New York. And she studied there. She studied history, economics, public speaking, and socialist theory. And James Maurer, who was from Reading and was a famous socialist leader in Reading and a two-time candidate for vice president of the US, was a frequent guest lecturer there at the Rand School. And so she met him, and he became one of her mentors. And it was probably through his influence that she traveled to Reading. While she was at the Rand School, she fell ill with the influenza virus that was spreading worldwide in 1918. And she became very ill. I think we can kind of relate to a lot of her story, because we're going through a similar thing now with the coronavirus. And she did recover, but the illness left her with some permanent heart damage. She had palpitations, or like a fluttering in her heart, and she'd tire out very quickly. So after she graduated, the year after she graduated from Rand, the school was raided and prosecuted and fined $3,000 for publishing and distributing anti-militarist propaganda, I guess you would call it, a pamphlet during wartime. And the socialists really opposed America's involvement in World War I. And so, of course, the socialist students at the Rand School did as well. And Lilith, throughout her life, was, I guess, what you'd call a pacifist and was opposed to war. So after she graduated, she traveled around the country as a party organizer and a speaker. And she went all over. There's accounts of her in states all over the place. You can find in news, if you are on newspapers.com, you have to have a membership for that, but you can find old newspapers from all over, and it's highly searchable, really easy to use with a keyword. And so I actually found something in the Ogden, Utah Standard Examiner from April 14th, 1921, that described her as an earnest and forceful speaker. And now that's really interesting because Darlington Hoops, who was the other socialist in the state legislature at the time that Lilith was, and was also from Reading, once said that she had a booming voice that could be heard for a mile. So, and yet another newspaper article described her as being, you know, a very demure and quiet person. So in her social life, she was demure and quiet, but when she got on the subject of politics, she let loose in a booming voice that could be heard, and maybe not for a mile, but to the back of the room or to the back of the auditorium or wherever she was speaking. So after well, I could tell you a little about her personal history, how she came to Reading on one of these speaking tours, and that's how she met her husband, Birch Wilson. And they were both socialists and had a lot of common interests. And so it was a very happy second marriage. They lived at first with his mother. They bought a house on South 15th Street, and they lived there. And then later they bought what I call a farmette over on New Holland Road, which was at the time in Cumru, but I think it's part of the city now, where the farm was. There's a church there now. And they raised, according to Birch's obituary, they raised baby chicks. Well, chicks are baby chickens, but that's how the newspaper termed it, baby chicks. So I guess they weren't actually raising chickens. I think maybe they were just hatching chicks or something and then selling them for egg production or the poultry market or whatever. But after she was elected, she told the newspaper that she missed, she was away from home so much that gardening and sewing and keeping house were just relaxing for her. So she looked forward to coming home on weekends and spending time with Birch on their farmette. She loved nature and the outdoors. That was another thing, and Birch did too. So that was another thing that they had in common. Now, as far as like her work and what she did when she was in the state legislature, she was reelected in 1932 and 1934. And two of her particular passions, I guess, or projects were she really cared a lot about women's rights and women workers' rights and workers' rights in general and children's rights. So one of her big things was introducing a bill to put an end to child labor. And there had been some legislation before that, and others had worked toward that. And they had gotten some of the youngest children out of the mills, but there were still teenagers working as breaker boys at collieries and in factories, and girls particularly working in the textile industry. And these jobs are really dangerous jobs because one of the other things that Lilith fought for was workplace safety. There were no workplace safety laws, so people could be maimed and killed, and especially these children who were working, they'd end up losing hands and arms or being crushed to death by machinery. So she was very much about getting the children out of the factories, out of the mines, and getting them into school. Every municipality in Pennsylvania had a public school system at the time, but there were no laws that said children had to go to school. So if a family needed the child to work or whatever, just to help support the family, the kids didn't go to school, they went to work. And so that was one of her things. Now, her other things, she really cared a lot about old people, and there was no Social Security at that time, and a lot of old people were destitute. So she introduced a bill for an old age pension, which was something like what we know as Social Security today. And she, so I'm going to get onto the controversial subjects here, but she was also a big advocate of birth control. She would see these women who had child after child after child, like my great grandmother who had 16 children, 5 of them died, 11 lived to adulthood, but women would be worn out and impoverished, basically, taking care of all of these children. And so at the time, birth control was illegal. Now, obviously, there was no pill or, any kind of oral contraceptive. It was devices, but condoms were available, but only by prescription and not for birth control. And they could only be prescribed by doctors to unmarried men for the purpose of preventing venereal disease. They could not be prescribed to married men or single or married women, and they were not to be used for birth control. So this was another one of her passions in her campaign. She very much advocated the legalization of birth control. So in her final term, she started to become ill, and newspapers called it a nervous complaint. She was in and out of hospitals. She had heart palpitations. She was tired all the time. She ended up spending time at Warnersville State Hospital. And I wonder now, was she suffering from acute stress, as we would call it today, a so-called nervous complaint, or were doctors just dismissing the fact that she had heart disease? Because even now, some women have trouble getting doctors to take them seriously, because for so long, heart disease was, oh, well, that's a men's disease. Women don't get heart disease. Well, guess what? Women do get heart disease. And in fact, Lilith died of heart disease. She died in 1937. She was at the Warnersville State Hospital when she died, but her death certificate lists cardiomyopathy. They called it myocarditis at the time, but it's the same as cardiomyopathy, which is a heart weakness that's generally caused by a virus. So remember, she had that flu virus. And that's what she died of. And in the complications on her death certificate, the doctor listed the 1918 influenza. So that is what Lilith died of. And now this is her tombstone at Allenbach Cemetery. You can see on the front, it says "At peace with nature." She absolutely loved nature. And if you go around to the back, you can read all about her accomplishments and that her life was dedicated to the common good. And it really was. She fought for the underdog, the workers who had no rights, for the old people, the children, women. And so, yes, her life was dedicated to the common good. And that is Lilith's story. Thank you. And now I have to introduce Corey again with, shall I say, our infamous woman. Corey, you're muted.
God, I was so engrossed in all these stories. Well, okay, so that was a good introduction for our mystery woman, and I'm going to have to talk really fast. So now you've heard lots of stories about women who have received awards, women who have received honors, women who have been highly regarded in life. I'm going to tell you about a woman who was steeped in corruption, seduction, and lies. A story that spreads through World War I, World War II, and into the journals of the FBI. But she was a smart woman. She was independent. She was a successful businesswoman and all the while remaining a church-going woman. I'm talking about Mary Steffi, or Mary Quinn, or Mary Sellers, or Mary Dotter, or Mary Setley, or Mary Gruber, or whatever name she was using on that particular day. I'm really talking about Dutch Mary, called so because of her heavy Pennsylvania Dutch accent. So I'm wondering how many of us remember her. Do you know that name? I'm going to tell you all about her. If you don't know her name, I'm sure your parents or your grandparents know her name very well, because in the day, she was an institution in Reading and beyond. She was tainted, yes, but a large thread in the city's tapestry. She was born Mary Steffi on April 23rd, 1872, in East Texas, Lehigh County. I think that's somewhere around Long Swamp Township. Her father was a pastor, and he founded the Church of God on Smith Street in Topton. Here's a true story. During the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, during World War II, the English-speaking German soldiers or spies were trying to infiltrate the American encampments. Our military police commanded, "Hey, halt, soldier, who goes there?" "Robert Reed, sir." "Medic 70, infantry, sir." "Where are you from, soldier?" "Reading, Pennsylvania, sir." "Who's Dutch Mary?" As the soldier's face turned bright red and a sly smile spread over both of their faces. "Yes, soldier, you are from Reading, PA. You can pass." That's just a funny story, how well known she was. But although Mary, she used many aliases to hide her identity and keep her privacy, those who knew her personality saw the other side of her, or the paradox. She had unbounding generosity for the poor and the needy. She would help anyone. And she was always searching just for that respect and for religious atonement. I want to pull up the picture of the article. Tragedy struck her Plum Street home. On July 19th, 1915, Mary's beloved husband, John Quinn, was found sprawled out dead on the dining room floor at 24 Plum Street. He lost his job as a railroad patrolman, and he was suffering from severe depression. He chose to drink a concoction of carbolic acid to end it all. He was 43 years old, and at that time, Mary found herself a widow. She never remarried. She went through a lot of turbulent times after John's death. She went through many different kingpins or gangsters in Reading, such as Hassel, Moran, and Minker. The hardest times were through the Tony Moran era. Mary's life does get a little hard to follow at times, but this is how she wished it to be. So I want to bring up a picture of the church. This was her father's church. This is a current picture of it. But this was the church Mary frequently attended. And they say that, she was a really big contributor too. She would attend church every Sunday and faithfully put her donations into the church collection. So she really, believe it or not, had a favorable reputation in an unsavory business. That's hard to believe, but I'm amazed at it. You want to say, okay, oh, she was this, she was that, but when you step out of the box and you look, she was an amazing woman. She was an employer. She provided steady work, medical benefits, warm meals, a clean home, and she had a content customer base. And she also provided bail money for when that was needed. But things started to really get rough. I'm sorry, things started to really flourish down in the Plum Street and Cherry Streets district. They were kind of known as the little parking lot, or some people lovingly called it Club 22, because Mary owned a bunch of houses on Plum Street, 22, 24, 27. She also owned a few houses on Cherry and a few houses on Franklin. So she really did know her way around real estate also. But, and it's ironic that all the places that she did own right now are parking lots. Mary also helped the businesses on Penn Street with her going up and down to the markets. She brought a lot of money into these places. She'd purchase a lot of items to feed the girls, and she also would feed the needy. The girls often would take baskets and drop them off anonymously at people's houses, just because Mary wanted to help out. At Christmas time, she would spend a few $100s at the Mary Jane shoe store. She would also buy baby clothing from Lobel's, and she'd take them over to the children's home at Reading. So she was a really giving person. Pomeroy's especially made out with Mary and some of her dirty money, if you'd want to call it. But she spent a lot of time. She actually would go in the back entrance, which was closer to her house, but she'd enter by the back entrance of Pomeroy's, if any of you guys remember it, off of Cherry Street. And she'd go in and go down the bargain basement. She spent thousands of dollars on clean linens and towels and clothing and products for the girls that they were taking care of. The employees at Pomeroy's, well, they didn't like it, but I'll tell you, they were well schooled that when Mary walked in the store, they were not to make a sound, they were not to make a face, because they really, really enjoyed her money. Things got rough for Mary during the Tony Moran age. Tony was a big gangster in the city of Reading. He ruled the streets. He liked to go to businesses and ask them to pay for protection. And in turn, he would protect them, supposedly, but he would also run some products through their business. Mary would never go into the protection program. She just wanted to stay in her own. And also with that protection program, they got into white slavery and things like that. That's a whole nother story. But she, after a while, she got so tired of being hassled by Moran, being robbed, being attacked, being arrested. Oh, you know, by the way, I want to mention this. This Sunday, March 21st, is the 76th anniversary of Tony Moran's death. Whole big story about him being shot out by his best friend. But March 21st, 1945, 43-year-old Anthony Morena was killed. Very happy day for Mary, because she thought that her persecution was over. Because of the way he treated her and harassed her, it was one of the main reasons why she squealed to the FBI. The FBI has actual phone recordings of her and handwritten letters of her, anonymous letters. You could tell it was from her. She had a Pennsylvania Dutch way of writing, and every letter came in with letterhead from the Abraham Lincoln Hotel. Wonder how she got those letterheads. But her story goes on and on. We don't have enough time for that. But being old and tired, oh, thank you. There's a postcard addressed to Mrs. John Quinn from one of her many admirers. And I have a bunch of her postcards which come from around the world. Men checking in, ladies checking in, asking about how the girls are, how the husband is. But after a while, her being so old and tired, she moved in with her sister Lillian. Lillian lived in the 200 block of South 8th Street. And, you know, Mary, she lived a bittersweet life. She really had a nice life. She loved her girls. She treated them like they were daughters, since she never had any children of her own. But funny thing, I'm sitting here, and if you look behind me, this side, that is the center part of the door from the South 8th Street home. Imagine how many times that door's been knocked on. The person I got it from, my neighbor, she bought that house and lived in that house, and she removed the door just thinking that it was beautiful and it was worth something, but she never sold it. I kind of think she was saving it for me, don't you? But despite the life she chose, surprisingly, Mary lived a clean life. Mary ate no meat, smoked no tobacco, she drank no liquor, and she used no foul language. She was a vegetarian. But on the afternoon of August 14th, 1959, the 87-year-old sat in a bar stool, the Stork Hotel, which is at the end of South 8th Street, right at Bigham. I believe that the bar is still there. I don't know if it's still called the Stork or not, but she was not feeling well. The bar tender called an ambulance, and one of Mary's favorite detectives, Paul Hill, walked in just in time to catch her as she slid off the bar stool into his arms. How apropos, she died in the arms of the law. She was taken to St. Joe's Hospital and then to Lutz's funeral home, where it was told she was laid out in an orchid dress. Her body was claimed by friends who they say Mary was very good to them. Don't know who they were. They never signed their name, but just shows in the end she had many, many friends. And to end, I'd like to read a quote from Ed Taggart, who was a Reading Eagle newspaper man who we recently lost. Ed Taggart had a really great interest in Dutch Mary. Ed Taggart says, her scandal could be perceived as a feminist triumph because this woman gained a liberating reputation for women. They claim that the prostitute is not the victim of men, as feminists claim, but rather their conqueror. Many big men came down from the secrets spilled in Pillow Talk. So hopefully this is interesting to you. And hopefully within this year, you will be able to read a little bit more about Dutch Mary and about her story. And I'm also going to combine with J.D. Del Callo and add a really cool story, interesting story about the gangsters of Reading. So I'm quickly trying to wrap this up. I have some artifacts of Mary. This is, I guess you would call it a door stopper. It's a shoe. It's cast iron. It's really heavy. I also have one of her curling irons here, very old with an old socket. I have a really pretty decoration here of a fancy woman holding a little fan, which that's pretty cool. I have a whole bunch of her postcards. There was a harp or something that was Mary's, a plate. So when my neighbor purchased her property, she really had a treasure trove. And why she saved this stuff, I don't know. But I went crazy when I found out that my neighbor kept this stuff. Sadly enough, my neighbor did pass away, and I recently inherited all this stuff from Dutch Mary. So hopefully you'll be excited and want to read more about Dutch Mary and the Gangsters of Reading. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you all. That was great. Fascinating women, really.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have questions?
We did get a nice cross-reference of people from the city of Reading, and you know, as much as most of them all kind of lived at the same time, with the exception of Dinah Clark, I wonder. I don't think they would have probably been a bunch of people that would have been hanging out together too much. So,
yeah.
Yes, hi, I appreciated the program tonight. I have a question for Corey. As far as Kate Whitman, do you know, is her family responsible for some of the Whitman housing developments that came along in the 50s or so?
Yeah, no, they're not. It's different spelling. Whitman, who created the Whitman homes in Pennside, is Whitman. And I do believe that the old Mr. Whitman is still alive. But Kate and Billy actually spelled it Whitman.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question. Why did he build a pagoda? Why didn't he build something? Why didn't he build something that was more well, you wouldn't know, because more representative of.
So many
the
people
area.
ask me that question, Ann, and that's why I wrote a book about it. But more or less, all I can think of is that, you know, he was a feisty redheaded politician. He liked his women and he liked his politicking. And back then, we were just starting to be able to hear some things about Japan and places that we could never visit overseas because of travel. And I don't know, I think that it just looked very classy, romantic, and enticing to him. The idea came to him when his friend showed him a postcard. His friend, James Matz, was in the service and traveled down through the Suez Canal, down near the Philippines, where there were pagodas and things like that. Now, we want to say, oh, it's a Japanese pagoda, but I don't know. Ours might be fashioned after a Philippine pagoda. That is where James Matz was. William Whitman was never in Japan. Matz is the only one that was down there and had this postcard, which the family had for a while, but they don't know where it's at. So I believe we have an Oriental Pennsylvania Dutch pagoda. But I think he kind of thought, wow, this is crazy. People are going to love me and they're going to vote for me for mayor. And I don't know. I just kind of think that's how we got the pagoda.
So was it built as a house of ill repute?
Not, I don't want to say that, but I can kind of allude to that with the type of man he was. The mountain was secluded. Not a lot of people could get up there. Even with the gravity railroad coming up there, the gravity was up the road a little bit. The pagoda was down the way, secluded, and you had to either walk there or get there by, you know, a little old vehicle, or I guess you could ride your horse up there. So he kind of had a little private club to himself. So who knows what he was going to do, but the rooms are tiny and tiny enough for just a cot and a sink.
Oh.
So I don't know. You could think that if you'd want.
Secluded room with a view of the city.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful place now when it's closed right now due to COVID. But when it opens up again, keep it in mind, it's a great place for birthday parties and meetings. And like Rick said, you can look out over the city.
Yeah.
You're on top of the world.
If it's a clear day, you can see the whole county.
Mhm.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Is that Dutch Mary? Is that who that is? That picture?
Yes, that's her. Yeah, and one of her very last days.
Oh,
She was not a looker, but she had a faithful following, and you know, she had happy customers. So
Yeah.
what a great woman.
Good customer service.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it's hard to find that anymore.
I know. I was surprised when I started digging into her story,
Yeah.
and I would step out of the box and think, you know what? She was something else, that girl.
Yeah. She was.
Mhm.
And will this program be available for people to rewatch if they wish to watch
This
it?
program will be on YouTube, on the Wyomissing Public Library YouTube channel.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, we've been trying to put up as much as we can. So. Anybody else?
I was interested to hear about Pearl Haynes, and not to brag, but I took dance lessons from her.
Did you?
When I was 4
You and a
years
lot of other people.
I know my mother took me to South 6th Street, and I'm sure that's, you know, and that's about the times. I know that,
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that name, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
She was
kind of
quite
interesting.
popular in her day. That's no doubt about that,
Yes, I heard she was,
like I said, for how much, when you look at what she did and just what she commanded as far as attention, because even as a young girl, the thing that, we're talking about reviews, and they were at some large venues, of course, but, for it to be like headlines in the newspaper, that's like, and with her name as the headline, I thought that must be pretty big stuff for a young girl that was maybe 10,
Yeah.
11 years old at the time, and then
right,
when I used to see all the movie reviews, it was like, well, Pearl Haynes was just in New York and she saw this movie a couple of days ago, and she really recommends it. It's like, it was like when you saw that, it was like, wow, this is like something else, and then just like I said, when you saw like the articles that they would talk about the entertainment gossip and stuff, and her name is in the same articles with like John Barrymore, Myrna Loy, and whatever, it's like, so it's like, it was kind of fun, Yeah, definitely. She was a big star. She didn't really make a lot of money at it, but she had everything she wanted. She had a good life. No doubt about that.
So was she a good
I
dancer?
would have never,
She was a good dancer, all right. Yeah.
No, was she a good dance teacher?
Apparently, she was there, well respected in that if she ran that dance studio as long as she did.
Uh-huh.
She ran that from 15, I guess, is when she started at the fire company, and then she moved it over to South 6th Street, and then I think she ran that for about 35 years. So I think that kind of tells you through
Yeah.
the Depression too,
Yeah.
up until she got married in
What do you
1952.
Rosemary, do you think she was a good teacher?
I only went one year, and my only memory is the
Yeah,
mother's laugh.
Why ask
Because
me? We got
like- I couldn't skip. I couldn't
Oh.
skip, and I remember that. That really had a terrible impact on me. I mean, I have a pretty good memory, and I remember them laughing. We were skipping around. I was only 4, so yeah. But I'm sure she was well known. But I never would have pictured Dutch Mary like that. It's amazing that I would have pictured her as a bigger woman. Yeah, interesting. It was all very great.
and-
All of you did a great job.
Yeah.
The thing is, Dutch Mary and Pearl Haynes operated in a very, very close proximity to one another.
Mhm.
Yeah, and both of them, I guess, were in the world of entertainment, but one was in one sense of entertainment, the other one was the other.
So did all these women know, well, except for Dinah, would they have known each other?
I'm sure they knew of each other.
Just to at least
so
say hi, how are you?
I don't think they were
their
getting together
names
for
were in the
coffee.
paper. They definitely would have known each other's names, but whether they
Yeah.
would have actually known each other to say hello.
Yeah.
I don't think they were getting together for tea, so.
No tea. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I want to thank you all. This has been great. Thank you for taking the time on a Friday night. I appreciate it. And thank you all for attending. I hope,
Yes,
you enjoyed
thank
it.
you.
Okay, thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you.
night.
It was a lot of fun. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
We'll do it again sometime.